In this video for the KCAD Digital Art and Design Augmented Reality Framework, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to prepare the video asset. Now, unlike the image target asset, there is no technical process that needs to be followed specifically for the application or the AR framework. It just needs to be a properly processed video to be used on the web, inside of a web application. Now, this initially means that the only true technical requirement is that it needs to be an MP4 file so that it will properly play in most browsers. Now, that doesn't mean that you should necessarily use a 4K 60 frames per second MP4 file. You very much want to consider the size and compression of the video so that it will work properly in your web application and have less bitrate for users to need to wait to buffer or to download and stream. So if I take a look at the video that's used in our example, the KCAD Digital Art and Design Entertainment Reel for 2020, I started with downloading the full HD 1080p version, 1920 by 1080, and I ran this through some MP4 compression and got it down to 92 megabytes here, which isn't too bad for a 4-minute and 43-minute video. But then I took and made a version that was 720p, 1280 by 720, got it down to 55 megabytes, and then even went down so far as to make a standard definition 640 by 360, 16.6 megabyte version for the web, and this is actually the version that is in the current framework in the example. If I go into the KCAD AR framework folder, to the web folder, examples, go into the AR image video example, and into assets, right next to our targets.mind file, we have our asset.mp4 video, and this is the 640 by 360, 16.6 megabyte version. So in your own project, you'll want to do lots of testing on different devices with different speeds, user testing to see what quality of video is necessary for your project. Usually you want to go as low as possible without losing any visual integrity or any of the user experience to make it load as quickly as possible. So I will go through quickly and show you what settings I like to use when preparing a video for the web. So I have a new project opened up in Adobe Premiere Pro, and I'm going to take this original HD. Now this has already been compressed, but I'll go ahead and show you the process anyway. Typically I would end up with a more raw file that needs to be compressed for the web. I'm going to take this, I mean to open it, I'm going to take this and just drag it, just one more time, onto the timeline here. That'll automatically import it and create a sequence in Premiere. And from here I could edit the video, but I already have it ready to go and I really just want to compress it for the web and export it. So from Premiere, you can go to File, Export, Media. And I could start to use the settings right from inside of Premiere here, but I typically like to use the Adobe Media Encoder. So I'll press this button, Send to Media Encoder. The reason I do that, give it access, and it didn't switch over automatically in front of my screen, but here it is. It added this video ready to go in the Media Encoder. Now, you could, in theory, drag the video directly into the Media Encoder, but usually you're working from Premiere or After Effects in some kind of final editing phase before you're finally ready to render out a video and compress it for the web. So usually I go from Premiere or After Effects, export into Adobe Media Encoder, because this is made more for compressing things into the web. And not only do we have a couple more options, but we also have the ability to create a queue of multiple videos to just kind of run multiple compressions at once without having to sit here and watch it the whole time. But for this one off, we'll take a quick look at it, and we can see that right away it's picking up that we want the H.264 codec. That's what will make it an MP4 file that has the most compatibility across browsers on the web. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and click on Match Source here, and we're going to change some of the, drag the settings over to this window. I'm going to change some of the default settings to make sure that it's ready for the web. Okay, so first off, initially width and height here. This is the full HD 1920 by 1080 version of the video. So I'm going to uncheck this, and maybe we want to scale it down a little bit. So I'll leave this locked. So if I change the width or the height, it'll keep the aspect ratio. So let's go ahead and just go to 1280. Which is the 720p, meaning the progressive vertical or horizontal lines on a screen will be 720. So that will save us some speed at least, or some file size from the original HD size, but should still be a pretty good definition to be able to view through the web. So 720p may be a good place to start. Go down, and some of these other things, the frame rate, right now this is set at 24. You could experiment with moving it down. A lot of times it may be at 60 or 30. To move it down to 30 or even 15 can positively affect the size and compression of an MP4 file getting smaller and being easier to stream and play. But 24 is good. We'll leave it at what I have it imported as here. We can leave it as progressive and square pixels. In fact, we'll scroll down past all these encoding settings. We'll just leave the default of what it has here to encode the H.264 MP4 file. And we'll go all the way down past all these settings to where we get to the bitrate settings. Now this is where the rubber hits the road when it comes to compression and the size of the video. Now there's three different types. There's a constant bit rate and then a variable bit rate. I usually choose a variable bit rate because that will allow for more compression and more action and motion areas of the video, and less compression and more still frame areas of the video to give you a better overall performance and file size. And you can even so far as to do a 2-pass variable bit rate, meaning you'll go over the video twice to determine what's the best bit rate for various parts of the video. Now, the only difference whether you use constant or variable is you have one or two options here. If we stuck to variable bitrate in 1-pass, then we just get a target bitrate. A lot of times you'll see this default very high in the 10s, 20s, even 100s, just based on very different levels of compression for modern video codecs and formats. But when we're compressing something for the web, we very much want to set the target bit rate very low. I like to start at about 2 megabits per second is the Mbps here. That's how it's measured. And that usually doesn't have any artifacts. In fact, you can even lower this to 1 or even 0.5 and start to barely see some different kind of artifacts or JPEG-like kind of compression throughout the video frames. But if you start with 2 megabits per second, it's usually a pretty good safe area that you're not going to see any visual difference, and it'll compress it quite a bit down from some defaults to make sure that it's at least in range for the web. So I like to do a VBR 2-pass, and maybe we'll give it a target bit rate of 2, or actually maybe we'll give it a target of 1 and give it a maximum of 2. So you get this range when we do a 2-pass. Maybe we could go 2 and 4 if we wanted to err on a high quality video a little bit, but for this, since we're dropping it down from HD from 1080p to 720p, I'm going to try a maximum bit rate of 2 megabits per second and a target of 1 to see how well I can compress this. So those are really the main two, set this back, areas to look at for compression. Is number one, the actual pixel dimensions of it. That makes a big difference, how big the actual video is in pixels. And then we can leave the rest default and then just set the bitrate settings here. The audio settings are fine with the AAC audio that's used is really, really good for compression for the web. And once we set those two things, we can hit OK. And then we'll go ahead and hit play to play our cue here. Actually, before that, I'll click here and choose a location or choose a name for the exported video. So instead of this here on my desktop, I'll put it back in my downloads where those others are stored. And we'll just call this web compression test. And then usually I'll put the size. Maybe I'll put 720p after it so we know just by glancing at the file name. Hit save, and then I can just hit play here, and it will begin the queue of compressing the file. Only take a minute or so. Could do a whole bunch of them at once and then go take care of something else and come back to it. Now, one thing to mention while this is compressing is that the aspect ratio of the video, this is using a regular 16:9 aspect ratio. I matched the image target to also be 16:9, and that seemed to fit the video over the image perfectly. There could be some creative ways to have different sized videos or different sized image targets in different ways to create different effects with the AR. So we'll take a quick look at how this compressed. But that's basically the process. Is once we have a web-ready compressed video, here we are, and we went from our 92 megabytes to our smaller one that's down to 46.7. In fact, I can even compare this to my other 720p that's 55, where I probably had a slightly larger bit rate. So you could then test this, take a look at the motion, and see if there's anything that you would need changed in the compression. And then finally, when you have your MP4 ready, you'll be able to put it into the right place inside of the AR framework to have it take over in your own example. And I'll show you that in an upcoming video. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and look at how to actually open up the framework in Animate on your device and launch it and be able to use it and test it locally before we begin replacing things with your own assets and troubleshooting and testing your own project.